I've been in the U.S. Army for just under 16 years. Long enough to stop counting promotions as milestones and start measuring time by deployments, inspections, and how many times I've sat through safety briefings that everyone thinks they already knows. I wasn't new. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't trying to prove anything. That's why the accident caught me completely off guard. That morning started like dozens of others. I was at the training area before sunrise coffee, already cold clipboard tucked under my arm. My role that day wasn't even hands-on. I was there in an oversight capacity, moving between lanes, checking timing, making sure the younger officers were sticking to the plan. It was routine. Loud, dusty, hot, and boring in the way only a well-run training day can be. We were rotating between sections when someone suggested we take a vehicle to save time. It wasn't dramatic. No rush. No pressure. Just efficiency. I climbed into the passenger seat of a military vehicle I'd ridden in more times than I could remember. Helmet on. Seatbelt locked. Same drill. The ground out there isn't forgiving. Ruts, loose gravel, uneven slopes you don't think twice about until you hit them wrong. We took a turn that felt a little sharper than expected. The vehicle jolted hard, then harder. There was a split second where my brain tried to convince me it would settle. It didn't. When a military vehicle tips, it doesn't ease down. It goes over with weight and violence. Metal slammed. My body whipped sideways. The seatbelt dug into my chest like it was trying to split me in half. I heard a sharp crack that I later realized came from my own ribs. Pain hit fast and clean, the kind that shuts off your ability to think clearly. For a few seconds, everything went quiet, except for ringing in my ears. I couldn't tell if I was upside down or sideways. I tried to breathe and felt like my chest was caving in. My right shoulder burned useless, refusing to respond when I tried to move it. I remember thinking very calmly that this was a stupid way to die. Not overseas. Not under fire. Just a training accident in the middle of Texas. Voices rushed in after that. Someone was yelling for medics. Someone else was telling me not to move. Hands worked quickly, efficiently. The kind of calm that comes from people who've done this before. They cut the seatbelt and eased me down, careful but fast. Every movement sent a fresh spike of pain through my ribs. The medics talked to me the whole time. Name, rank, date, where am I? I answered automatically, even as my vision blurred around the edges. They slid oxygen under my nose and strapped me onto a stretcher. When I heard the distant thump of rotor blades, I knew they weren't taking chances. I'd watched soldiers get loaded onto medevac helicopters before. I'd signed off on reports. I'd stood on the other side of the scene. Being the one strapped down was different. The air vibrated as we lifted off. Every breath felt like work. The medic kept one hand on the rail and one on my shoulder, steady, reassuring, like that alone could keep me together. The flight was short, but it felt longer. Bright lights met us when we landed. Doors opened. Voices overlapped. Someone asked about allergies. Someone else cut my uniform open without asking. My boots were gone before I realized they'd touched them. A doctor leaned into my line of sight and told me I was stable. Stable felt like a generous word. They wheeled me into a room and started listing injuries like they were reading from a checklist. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, possible concussion. Pain meds followed. The edge came off the pain, but not enough to make it disappear. Enough to make it manageable. Once things slowed down, the quiet settled in. The kind of quiet that leaves room for thoughts you don't usually have time for. A nurse adjusted my IV and asked the standard question. Did I want them to notify family? I told her she could call. I didn't give a long list. Just my parents and my sister Madison. It didn't feel like something I needed to think about. That's what people do. Something happens and family shows up. Even if it takes a day. Even if it's awkward. Even if they don't know what to say. The nurse stepped out and came back later, clipboard in hand. She told me she'd spoken to them. Her tone was neutral, professional. She said my parents mentioned the distance to the base and assumed I was already being taken care of. Madison, she said, was busy with school but understood I was in good hands. They'd asked to be kept updated. I nodded like that explanation made sense. On paper, it probably did. Military hospital. Doctors everywhere. Nurses rotating in and out. I wasn't alone in the technical sense. The nurse asked if there was anyone else she should contact. I said no. As the pain meds settled in again, I stared at the ceiling tiles and listened to the beeping monitor beside me. Outside the window, the sky was already turning orange with late afternoon heat. My phone sat on the tray table within reach, screen dark. I didn't expect it to light up immediately. People have lives, schedules, traffic. I closed my eyes for a moment and focused on breathing slow and shallow like they'd instructed. The ache in my ribs flared every time I inhaled too deeply, a sharp reminder that my body wasn't interested in toughing this out. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled past. Someone laughed. The hospital kept moving steady and indifferent. I shifted slightly and winced, then settled back against the pillows. I told myself it was fine, that everyone knew where I was, that they'd call when they could. The phone stayed quiet, resting face up exactly where I'd left it. The monitor beside the bed chirped as I shifted my weight, and a sharp line of pain ran from my ribs up into my shoulder. I stopped moving and stared at the phone again, still dark, still silent, like it was making a point. A nurse came in to check vitals and adjust the sling. She asked me to rate the pain. I gave her a number that felt honest without sounding dramatic. She nodded like she'd heard it 100 times before and reminded me to keep my breaths shallow. Deep breaths, she said, would only make it worse right now. I did what she said. I've always been good at following instructions. When she finished, she asked if I needed anything. Water, another blanket, someone to sit with me for a bit. I shook my head. The room already had everything it was supposed to have. What it didn't have wasn't something she could bring. A few hours passed in pieces. A doctor stopped by and explained the scans. Nothing life-threatening, which felt like a technical win. Broken ribs take time. The shoulder would need follow-up. No surgery for now. Light duty when I was cleared. He asked if family had been notified. I said yes. He seemed satisfied with that and moved on to the next room. The pain meds wore off just enough to make everything feel louder. The air conditioner kicked on and off. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Somewhere nearby, someone was arguing quietly on a phone call. I checked my messages again. Still nothing. No missed calls. No new texts. Not even the kind of generic, let us know if you need anything message people send when they don't know what else to say. Later that evening, the same nurse came back. She mentioned she'd spoken to my parents earlier in the day and that they'd asked to be kept updated. She said it casually, like it was a normal part of her shift, which it probably was. I asked her what they'd said exactly. She hesitated for half a second, then told me. They were concerned, she said. They just lived far from the base and assumed I was in good hands. Madison, my sister, had asked if I'd be staying overnight and said she had classes she couldn't miss. I nodded again. It was becoming a habit. The nurse adjusted the IV and asked if I wanted her to call them back. I said no. Not because I didn't want them to know how I was doing, but because I didn't want to chase anyone. I'd spent enough years doing that already. Night came on, slow and heavy. The lights dimmed, but sleep didn't follow. Every time I shifted my ribs, reminded me exactly where they were broken. I lay there listening to the monitor and counting the seconds between breaths, the way I'd been taught to do when things hurt, and there was nothing to fix immediately. Sometime after midnight, I unlocked my phone and opened the family group chat. It wasn't empty. Madison had posted a picture earlier that evening. A coffee cup on a desk laptop, open caption about studying late. My mom had commented something encouraging. My dad had added a thumbs-up emoji. The thread was alive and well, just not interested in where I was lying at that exact moment. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to, then locked it and set the phone back down. I told myself they knew I was okay. That was the story everyone seemed comfortable with. The hospital was doing its job. I was being monitored. I wasn't alone in the technical sense. Morning came with the sound of carts rolling past and the smell of something pretending to be breakfast. A physical therapist stopped by to talk about breathing exercises and what recovery would look like over the next few weeks. She was direct, efficient, and kind in the way professionals are when they don't have time to be sentimental. She asked if anyone would be helping me at home when I was discharged. I said I'd figure it out. She nodded, wrote something down, and moved on. No follow-up questions. No raised eyebrows. Just another box checked. Later, a young medic came in to take blood. He asked where my family was from. I told him. He made a comment about how far of a drive that would be. I agreed. He tied off my arm and worked quietly, then told me to let someone know if I started feeling dizzy. I almost laughed at that. Feeling dizzy would have been the least surprising thing that day. By the afternoon, the pain had settled into something dull and constant. The kind you can ignore if you don't move too much. I adjusted the bed with the remote and propped myself up enough to watch the door. It stayed closed. I checked my phone again. No calls, no texts, just notifications from apps I didn't care about and the same family chat now discussing what to make for dinner. Madison chimed in with a suggestion. My mom agreed. My dad sent another emoji. At some point, it stopped feeling like waiting and started feeling like observing. I noticed how often my eyes went to the phone without me telling them to. I noticed how quickly I justified the silence. They're busy. It's a long drive. She has class. Everyone assumes hospitals are boring, but safe places where nothing really happens. The nurse came back near the end of her shift and asked if anyone had come by. I said no. She didn't look surprised. She told me she'd check on me again before she left and asked if I wanted something for sleep. I declined. Sleep felt optional. When the room went quiet again, I opened the group chat one more time. Madison had posted a picture of takeout containers spread across a table. A little celebration for surviving the day, the caption read. My mom commented that she deserved a break. My dad added his usual reaction. I locked the phone and set it face down this time. The pain in my chest flared as I shifted, a reminder that my body hadn't missed what happened just because everyone else seemed to have moved on. I stared at the ceiling tiles and focused on breathing the way I'd been told. Shallow, controlled, efficient. The hospital kept doing what hospitals do. Monitors beeped, staff rotated in and out. The system worked. I was being cared for. The phone stayed exactly where it was. My phone vibrated against the plastic tray table, not with a call but with the dull buzz of another notification I didn't care about. I flipped it over, checked the screen, then set it back down without unlocking it, the movement pulling at my ribs enough to make me pause and breathe through it. Day 2 started the same way day 1 ended. Vitals, meds, someone asking if I'd eaten, someone else reminding me not to push it. The routine was tight and predictable. The people doing their jobs knew exactly what to do. That part worked. What didn't change was the absence of anything personal. No missed calls, no voicemail, no message asking how bad it was or whether I needed anything. Just silence where something should have been. By mid-morning, the nurse who'd been on overnight shift stopped by to introduce the day nurse. She mentioned that my family had called earlier asking for an update. She said it in passing like a footnote. I asked what they'd been told. Stable, resting, monitoring pain. The standard script. They'd thanked her and hung up. That was it. I nodded again, the same automatic response I'd been using since I got there. I didn't ask if they'd mentioned coming by. The answer was already clear. Around lunchtime, a captain I'd worked with a few months back poked his head into the room. He had a paper cup of coffee in one hand and an awkward look on his face like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to be there. He said he'd heard about the accident and wanted to check in. He didn't stay long, just enough to ask if I needed anything and make a joke about paperwork piling up without me. When he left, the room felt different for a minute. Not quieter, just less empty. That feeling didn't last. I checked my phone again out of habit. Still nothing from Madison. Nothing from my parents beyond whatever they were asking the nurses. The group chat, on the other hand, was active. Madison posted another photo. This time it was a study group notebook, spread out coffee cups lined up like props. My mom commented something supportive. My dad reacted with a thumbs up. The message thread scrolled on, completely disconnected from the bed I was lying in. I locked the screen and set the phone aside face down. By the afternoon, I stopped wondering if they'd call and started paying attention to how often I caught myself making excuses for them. The drive is long. She's busy. They know you're okay. I'd used those same lines before when explaining their behavior to other people. Now I was using them on myself. A physical therapist came back to walk me through breathing exercises again. She reminded me to keep my shoulders relaxed and my breath shallow. I followed along, counting silently. When we finished, she asked if anyone would be visiting later. I said probably not. She nodded and moved on without comment. That evening, another soldier I barely knew stopped by with a bag from the PX. He said someone mentioned I might want something warmer than the hospital blanket. He handed me a hoodie and left without making it weird. I thanked him and pulled it on carefully once he was gone, the fabric soft against my arm. It smelled like detergent and the base store. Normal things. I checked my phone after that, not because I expected anything new, but because it felt like the thing I was supposed to do. Still nothing. No missed calls, no messages, just the same group chat now talking about dinner plans. Madison suggested a place. My mom agreed. My dad added another emoji. At some point, the realization settled in quietly. They weren't waiting to hear from me. They weren't checking the time and wondering if it was too late to call. They weren't hesitating because they didn't know what to say. They'd made a decision even if they didn't think of it that way. They'd decided this was handled. Night came again. The lights dimmed. The hallway quieted down. I lay there listening to the monitor and the distant sounds of staff changing shifts. I unlocked my phone one last time before turning the screen off completely. The chat had gone quiet. Everyone had said what they needed to say. Day 3 didn't bring anything new from them either. No texts asking how the night went. No calls checking in. The nurses updated my chart. The doctor stopped by and said recovery was on track. He asked again about family support. I told him I had it covered. The truth was, I'd stopped expecting anything by then. It wasn't disappointment anymore. It was clarity. I could see the pattern without trying to explain it away. They knew where I was. They knew what had happened. They'd been informed, updated, reassured. And still they stayed where they were. That afternoon, I watched a group of soldiers pass my door laughing about something I couldn't hear. One of them glanced and recognized me and waved. I waved back. The small gesture mattered more than it should have. I checked my phone again. Madison had posted another picture. This one was of a smoothie on a counter captioned with something about self-care. My mom commented that she was proud of her for staying focused. My dad liked the post. I set the phone down slowly, careful not to jar my ribs, and stared at the wall instead. It wasn't anger that settled in. It was something quieter, something solid. I'd spent years assuming proximity meant priority. Blood meant effort. Family meant showing up when it counted. Lying there with a broken body and too much time to think, I finally stopped pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me. The silence wasn't accidental. It was comfortable for them. It asked nothing. It required no change. The hospital room stayed the same. The staff rotated. The pain stayed manageable. Everything that was supposed to work did exactly that. The only thing missing was the one thing I'd always assumed would be automatic. The hoodie slid down my arm when I shifted the fabric, brushing against skin that still felt too sensitive, like everything had been turned up a notch. I tugged it back into place with my good hand and let my head sink into the pillow eyes on the door without really expecting it to open. It did anyway. A knock light, but deliberate. Then the door eased in just enough for a familiar face to appear. Major Green leaned against the frame like he wasn't sure if he was interrupting something important. He held a paper cup of coffee that smelled better than anything the hospital had offered so far. "Figured you could use something that doesn't taste like regret," he said. I smiled before I could stop myself. It hurt a little, the movement pulling at my ribs, but it was worth it. He stepped inside, set the cup on the tray, and took the chair without asking. We didn't talk about the accident. He asked how bad it was. I gave him the short version, and that was enough. He told me the range schedule had already been adjusted and joked that the paperwork would survive without me for a few days. He stayed maybe 10 minutes, long enough to matter. When he stood to leave, he told me to text if I needed anything and meant it in the way people only do when they actually intend to follow through. After he left the room, didn't feel quite as flat. Later that afternoon, Sergeant Bennett stopped by with a small bag from the PX. She said she'd heard the room got cold at night and figured I might want something cleaner than a hospital blanket. Inside were socks, a travel-size shampoo, and a granola bar I didn't remember liking, but suddenly appreciated anyway. She asked if I'd been sleeping. I told her not really. She nodded like that made sense. Before she left, she hesitated, then said, "My mom asked about you. She remembers you from the change of command last year. It was such a simple thing, but it landed harder than it should have." I thanked her and watched the door close again. The contrast was impossible to ignore. People who didn't share my last name were finding time between shifts, training blocks, and their own lives to check on me. People who wore the same uniform, followed the same schedules, and dealt with the same pressures showed up without being asked. I checked my phone out of habit. Still nothing from Madison. Nothing from my parents beyond whatever updates they were getting secondhand. The group chat, though, was busy. Madison had posted another picture. This one looked like a group of friends crowded around a table, glasses raised. My mom commented something about balance. My dad added his emoji. I set the phone down and stared at the wall instead. The next day brought more of the same, but in a way that made the pattern impossible to miss. A lieutenant I barely knew stopped by with a stack of magazines and said someone told him I might be bored. A medic from another unit poked his head in just to say he'd heard I was doing okay. No speeches, no awkward pity, just presence. At one point, a young specialist came in with a clipboard and asked if I wanted help arranging transportation when I was discharged. He assumed without asking that someone would be helping. I told him I'd handle it. He nodded and moved on, already onto the next task. In between visits, the hospital did what it does best. Vitals, meds, pain assessments, the rhythm stayed steady. What changed was the way I was paying attention. I started noticing how easy it was for people to show up when they wanted to. How little effort it actually took to send a message or make a call. How quickly busy stopped being a reasonable explanation and started sounding like a choice. That afternoon, I scrolled back through old messages, not looking for anything specific at first. Just patterns. Rent reminders. Quick thank yous followed by new requests. Messages from Madison that always seemed to start with an apology and end with a favor. My responses were predictable. "Of course, I've got it. Don't worry about it." I locked the phone and set it aside before I went too far down that road. A nurse came in to adjust my IV and asked if I'd had visitors. I told her yes. She smiled and said it was good to see support. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. That evening, Green came back with 2 junior officers in tow. They stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, clearly unsure what the right thing to say was. I saved them the trouble and made a joke about enjoying the forced vacation. They laughed relieved and told me to take it easy. When they left, the room felt fuller than it had all week. I checked my phone again. Still no calls from Madison. No messages asking how the day had gone. The group chat had shifted to weekend plans. Someone suggested brunch. Madison replied with a thumbs up. My mom chimed in with a time. My dad added his emoji. I turned the phone face down and focused on breathing through another wave of pain. By the 4th night, the pattern was undeniable. The people who were showing up were the ones who didn't owe me anything. The people who had always claimed to care were content to stay informed from a distance, as long as nothing was required of them. A nurse asked if I wanted help calling anyone before lights out. I told her no. Not because there was no one to call, but because I finally understood who would answer and who wouldn't. When the room went quiet again, I pulled the hoodie tighter around myself and listened to the familiar sounds of the hospital settling in for the night. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. A cart rolled past. The monitor beside me kept time without comment. I reached for my phone once more, not to check for messages, but to turn the screen all the way off. The weight of it rested solidly in my hand before I set it back down. For the first time since the accident, the silence felt different. Not empty, just honest. The phone felt heavier than it should have when I picked it up, the edge pressing into my palm as I scrolled with my thumb and tried not to shift too much in bed. My ribs didn't need any reminders, but they gave me one anyway. I wasn't looking for sympathy texts. I wasn't even checking the group chat. I opened my message history with Madison first, then my parents letting the screen load old conversations I hadn't thought about in a while. The dates stacked up fast. Years, not months. It started with small things. Madison asking if I could cover part of her rent because her paycheck came up short. She always said it was just this once. She always said she'd pay me back. I always said not to worry about it. At the time, it felt easier than arguing. I had a steady income. She didn't. End of story. Then there were the utility bills. My mom would call when the electric bill spiked in the summer. Texas heat, old house, nothing unusual. She'd sound stressed, apologetic, like it was a favor she hated asking for. I'd put it on my card, tell her to breathe and move on with my day. It wasn't a big deal. I told myself that a lot. My dad's truck repairs showed up next. Always urgent, always necessary. He'd send a picture of the estimate like evidence. I'd handle it, no questions asked. It was easier than listening to him explain why he couldn't do it right then. Lying there scrolling through message after message, I realized how rarely those conversations went the other direction. There were thank yous, sure. Quick ones. But there were no check-ins. No, how are you holding up? No, are you okay after that deployment? No curiosity about my life unless it intersected with their needs. I stopped scrolling and let the phone rest against my leg, careful not to let it slide. The room was quiet, except for the monitor and the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway. The hospital kept doing its thing. The past apparently did too. Another memory surfaced without much effort. Madison calling me selfish once because I'd hesitated before sending money. I'd been buried in paperwork that week, dealing with injury reports and legal reviews from a training incident overseas. I'd told her I'd get back to her later that day. She didn't like that. Said I didn't understand how stressful her situation was. I'd apologized. That part still bothered me. At the time, I thought being reliable was the same thing as being supportive. I thought showing up financially counted as showing up emotionally. No one ever corrected me. There was no reason for them to. The door opened quietly and Bennett stepped in, again this time, just to drop off a folder with some discharge information she'd picked up from the front desk. She asked how I was holding up. I said fine. She nodded like she knew that answer wasn't the full story and didn't push. After she left, I opened my banking app, not because I needed to do anything, but because it was habit. I knew exactly what I'd see. Multiple linked cards. Auto payments scheduled weeks out. Names I recognized without thinking about it. I didn't touch anything, I just looked. The realization wasn't dramatic. There was no rush of anger or sudden decision. It was more like a slow tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with broken ribs. I'd built a system around myself that made it easy for everyone else to stay comfortable. I'd done it quietly, efficiently, and without complaint. I told myself it was family duty. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they'd do the same for me if the situation were reversed. Lying in that bed, it was obvious how thin that logic was. A nurse came in to check my vitals and adjust the sling again. She asked if the pain meds were helping. I said yes. She reminded me not to rush recovery and left me with a fresh cup of water. I took a sip and set it down, then picked the phone back up. This time I opened the group chat. Madison had posted another update. A picture from a cafe captioned something about needing a break. My mom commented that she deserved it. My dad reacted the way he always did. I didn't feel angry. I felt something colder, something clearer. The pattern wasn't hidden. It never had been. I just hadn't wanted to name it. I'd confused being needed with being valued. I'd accepted obligation as proof of closeness. Another notification popped up from my calendar, a reminder for a bill I'd scheduled months ago. I dismissed it without thinking, then paused, my thumb hovering over the screen. For the first time, I noticed how many reminders like that existed. How many quiet commitments I'd made without ever saying them out loud. A doctor stopped by to check in and said everything still looked good. He asked if I had support at home once I was discharged. I said I'd manage. He nodded and reminded me to take it slow. After he left, I stared at the ceiling tiles again, counting the faint cracks and scuffs that marked where equipment had been moved too many times. I thought about how many emergencies I'd treated like inconveniences because they weren't happening to me. How often I'd smooth things over with money because it was faster than drawing a line. The phone buzzed once more. This time it was a generic alert from my bank about scheduled payments. Nothing urgent, nothing unusual. I locked the screen and set the phone down, the weight of it solid and familiar. The hospital room stayed the same. The staff rotated. The people who had shown up continued to do so. The difference was internal. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was paying attention. My phone lit up while I was adjusting the sling, the sudden brightness sharp enough to make me squint. I fumbled it with my good hand, expecting another pointless notification, and froze when I saw the alert banner instead. Unusual activity detected. Please contact your bank. I stared at the screen pulse ticking up for reasons that had nothing to do with pain. The message wasn't dramatic. No red flags, no all-caps warning. Just a standard security notice, the kind you get when something doesn't line up the way it should. I opened the banking app slowly. The screen took a second longer than usual to load, then the balance appeared with a gray bar across the top. Account temporarily restricted. Linked cards paused during verification. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It wasn't a seizure. It wasn't fraud. Just a freeze. A safety check. Annoying, but fixable. Before I could tap into the details, the phone started ringing. Madison's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it, the sound echoing in the quiet room. It rang long enough that I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. "What did you do?" she said. No hello, no pause. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, more surprised than offended. "What are you talking about?" "My card just got declined," she snapped. "I'm standing here like an idiot. You need to fix this." I looked down at the IV taped to my arm, the hospital bracelet snug around my wrist. "I'm in the hospital," I said. "I told you that." She huffed like I'd inconvenienced her. "Yeah, but this is embarrassing. Everyone's looking at me. Why would you mess with the account without telling us?" "I didn't mess with anything," I said, keeping my voice even. The bank froze it. "Temporary. Well, call them," she said. "That's what you do." The line went quiet for half a second, just long enough for me to realize she still hadn't asked why I was in the hospital or how bad it was. Before I could respond, another call buzzed through. My mom. I declined it and Madison started talking again. "This isn't funny," she said. "I have stuff coming out. Rent, food. You can't just shut things off." I repeated. "I'm literally lying in a hospital bed." She sighed like she was humoring a child. "Okay, but you're stable, right? They have doctors there. You should have told us sooner so we could plan." Plan what exactly, she didn't say. I ended the call before my patience ran out. The phone rang again immediately. This time it was my mom. I answered. "What's going on with the account?" she asked, voice tight. "My phone bill didn't go through and they shut off my service." "I had an accident," I said. "I'm in the hospital." The bank froze the account while they verify things. "Oh," she said like that was a side note. "Well, can you call them and get it sorted today? This is really stressful." I glanced at the clock on the wall. Mid-morning. Nurses coming in and out. Doctors rounding. "I'll look into it," I said. My dad called next. Same tone. Same problem. His gas card hadn't worked. He sounded annoyed, not worried. Like I'd forgotten to do something simple. "Fix it," he said. "I'm running late." By the time the calls slowed, my head was pounding harder than my ribs. Not from the pain, from the clarity. 4 days. That's how long it took for my phone to light up with their names. Not when I was strapped into a helicopter. Not when the nurse called. Not when they were told where I was and what had happened. It took a declined card. I stared at the screen, still glowing with missed calls and messages. The family group chat had exploded. Madison typing in all caps. My mom asking if anyone knew what was going on. My dad adding question marks like punctuation could solve it. I typed once, then erased it. Typed again, erased that too. A nurse came in to check my vitals and raised an eyebrow at the phone buzzing nonstop. I muted it and set it face down. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Family," I said. She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. When she left, I called the bank. The automated system took me through the usual maze. I verified my identity. The rep explained the freeze. Routine. Triggered by recent changes and inactivity patterns. Everything would be restored once I confirmed a few things. It was fixable. Simple. The kind of problem I'd handled 100 times before. I didn't do it. Instead, I set the phone down and watched the screen go dark. A text came through from Madison almost immediately. "You're being selfish. You know we depend on you." Another from my mom. "I don't understand why you're doing this to us." My dad followed with a short one. "Call the bank." No one asked how my chest felt. No one asked if I'd slept. No one asked when I was coming home or if I needed help getting there. I scrolled through the messages slowly, the words blurring together into the same demand repeated different ways. Fix it. Handle it. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I set the phone aside and focused on breathing the way the therapist had shown me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow. Controlled. The bank account being frozen hadn't created anything new. It had just taken away the cushion. The buffer I'd built so quietly that no one noticed it until it disappeared. Another message popped up from Madison. This one longer. Accusatory. She said I was overreacting, that accidents happen, that this was part of my job, that I shouldn't punish everyone else because of it. I didn't respond. The hospital room stayed steady around me. The monitor beeped. Footsteps passed in the hallway. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. My phone buzzed again, then again, then again. I left it where it was. The phone buzzed again as I tried to shift my weight, the vibration traveling straight through the tray table and into my ribs. I didn't pick it up right away. I waited until the pain settled back into something tolerable, then reached for it with the same slow care I'd been using for everything else. Madison had left a voicemail. I listened to it without putting the phone to my ear, letting it play on speaker at low volume. She was crying. Or at least doing a convincing impression of it. Her voice wavered as she talked about being blindsided about how humiliating it was to have a card declined in public, about how stressed Mom was and how unfair it all felt. She said she couldn't believe I'd do this to them without warning. When the message ended, the room felt quieter than before. Another message came in almost immediately after this one from my mom. She wasn't crying. She sounded tired, like this was something she'd been bracing for. She said she didn't understand why I was making things harder than they needed to be. She said families work through things together. She said everyone was already under enough stress. My dad didn't leave a voicemail. He sent a text. Short, direct. "We need to keep the peace. Just call the bank." I stared at the screen, the words sitting there like instructions. Like a checklist item I'd missed. A nurse knocked and stepped in before I could respond to any of it. She checked my chart, adjusted the IV, and asked if I'd like something for the headache I'd developed. I nodded. She handed me a cup of water and waited while I took the pills. As she turned to leave, she glanced at my phone still lighting up every few seconds. "You want me to come back later?" she asked. "No," I said. "You're fine." She smiled politely and left me alone with the noise. The group chat was chaos when I opened it. Messages stacked on top of each other, Madison typing in bursts, my mom trying to calm things down, my dad chiming in with clipped responses. It was all happening at once, like they'd finally noticed the absence and didn't know what to do with it. Madison accused me of acting like a victim. She said accidents were part of the job. She said I'd always been dramatic. My mom replied that no one was saying that we just needed to talk this out. My dad wrote that this didn't need to turn into a big thing. I typed a response and deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. The truth didn't need a paragraph. It didn't need defending. It was sitting right there in the timestamps. 4 days of silence. 1 declined card. I set the phone down and looked at the ceiling, counting breaths, until the pressure in my chest eased. When I picked the phone back up, I didn't open the chat. I called Madison directly. She answered on the second ring. "Are you going to fix it?" she asked, skipping over anything resembling concern. "I'm not calling the bank today," I said. There was a pause, sharp and sudden. "I'm not fixing it right now," I repeated. "I'm recovering. I'm in pain. I'm not dealing with this today." She laughed short and disbelieving. "You can't be serious." "I am." Her tone changed immediately. The frustration gave way to accusation. She said I was punishing them. She said I was being selfish. She said I knew how much everyone relied on me and that pulling this now was cruel. I almost died, I said, keeping my voice steady. You knew I was in the hospital. You chose not to come. That's not fair, she shot back. You were being taken care of. What did you want us to do? Sit there and watch you sleep. I pictured the hospital room, the empty chair, the hoodie someone else had brought. I wanted a call, I said. At least one. She scoffed. You're acting like this is our fault. You didn't even tell us how bad it was. You were told, I said. The nurse called. Well, she said you were stable, Madison replied. You can't expect everyone to drop everything every time something happens. Something in me went still at that. Not angry, not hurt, just done. I'm not fixing the account today, I said again. She hung up on me. My mom called right after. Her voice was softer, but the message was the same. She said Madison was upset. She said this situation was spiraling. She said it would all calm down if I just made the call and sorted it out. We didn't know it was that serious, she said. If we had, things would have been different. I didn't argue. I didn't list off the ways they'd been informed. I didn't bring up the photos, the posts, the silence. I just said I need space. There was a long pause on the line. Then she said, I don't recognize you right now. I'm still here, I said. I'm just not doing this. She sighed like she was disappointed in me and ended the call. The messages kept coming after that. Madison accusing. My mom pleading. My dad reminding me how easy it would be to fix. Each one framed the same idea in a different way. That I was responsible. That I was overreacting. That I was the one breaking something that had always worked. I muted the chat. For the first time since the accident, the silence felt intentional. Chosen. A physical therapist came by later and had me sit up at the edge of the bed for a few minutes. The movement sent a sharp reminder through my ribs, but I managed it. She told me I was doing well, and that progress was progress even when it felt slow. When she left, I checked my phone again, not to read messages, but to look at the call log. Missed calls stacked up under Madison's name, under my parents', all from that day. I didn't return any of them. The bank app was still open in the background, the account status unchanged. Restricted. Pending verification. One call away from being resolved. I closed the app. The room stayed quiet after that. The hospital hummed along. The staff did their jobs. My body did what it could. And for the first time, I didn't step in to smooth things over. I woke up to the dull ache in my chest and the faint glow of my phone lighting up the ceiling where I'd left it face down. The screen kept pulsing over and over like it was trying to get my attention without caring how I felt about it. I flipped it over carefully and saw the notifications stacked up. Not calls this time. Screenshots. A message from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Another from a cousin I barely knew. All of them pointed to the same thing. Madison had posted again. It wasn't explicit. She never did anything that could be traced cleanly back to her. Just a photo of her sitting in her car, sunglasses on, captioned with something about being hurt by the people you'd do anything for. The comments were already filling up. Friends telling her she was strong. Strangers talking about toxic family. Someone wrote that money always shows people's true colors. My mom had commented under it within minutes. A heart emoji. A line about how hard it is to watch your kids grow apart. My dad hadn't written anything, but his likes were there, quiet and consistent. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. The story they were telling didn't include a hospital bed, broken ribs, or a nurse calling them with updates. It didn't include 4 days of silence. It didn't include a declined card being the first reason they reached out. I locked the phone and set it down just as a nurse came in to check my vitals. She asked how I slept. I said fine. She asked if I'd had visitors scheduled for the day. I shook my head. She didn't know she was wrong. Mid-morning, the front desk called up to the room. The clerk sounded polite but cautious. She said my family was downstairs asking for visitor passes. She wanted to confirm if I approved. I stared at the wall for a second, then told her to send them up. Madison walked in first. Sunglasses still on like she was trying to protect herself from the fluorescent lights, or from being seen too clearly. She held a manila folder tucked under her arm. My mom followed, purse clutched to her chest, already wearing the expression she used when she wanted sympathy without questions. My dad came last, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. None of them looked at the sling. None of them commented on the bruising that crept up my neck. No one asked how I was feeling. Madison set the folder on the tray table without asking. "We need to talk," she said. I didn't move. "You're here," I said. "That's new." My mom stepped closer to the bed. "Sweetheart, we've all been under a lot of stress," she said. "This situation has gotten out of hand." Madison opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward me. Rent statements, utility bills, late notices. She tapped the top page with her finger. "If you just sign this, the bank can release the funds and everything goes back to normal." I looked at the paperwork, then at her. "You came to a military hospital," I said, "and brought bills." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. This affects all of us." My dad finally spoke. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be," he said. "Just fix it." I could hear the monitor behind me, steady and indifferent. I adjusted my position slightly, the movement sending a reminder through my ribs that I was still very much injured. "Did any of you come to see if I was okay?" I asked. "Or was this always the plan?" My mom frowned. "That's not fair." Madison crossed her arms. "You know you're fine. They wouldn't let you sit here if it was serious." I pushed the folder back toward her with my good hand. It slid a few inches and stopped. "I'm not signing anything." Her sunglasses came off so fast I barely registered it. "Are you kidding me?" "No," I said. "I'm not." She laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You're really doing this? You're choosing money over family." "I didn't choose this," I said. "You did. Days ago." My mom stepped in quickly, voice soft. "Honey, let's calm down. Madison's just upset. We can work this out if you just help a little." Temporary. Temporary. The same word they'd been using for years. My dad shook his head. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult." I looked at all three of them standing there with their expectations lined up like obligations. "You didn't come when I was hurt," I said. "You came when the money stopped." Madison's face hardened. "If you cut us off now," she said, "don't bother calling us family." I met her gaze. "You haven't called me." The silence that followed was thick and awkward. My mom muttered something about ungratefulness. My dad sighed like this was exhausting him. Madison grabbed the folder and tucked it back under her arm. "Fine," she said. "Don't expect us to forget this." They left the room without another word. The door clicked shut behind them, and the quiet rushed back in. A nurse stepped in, a minute later, eyes flicking between me and the empty doorway. "Everything okay?" she asked. "They're done," I said. She nodded and went about her business, adjusting the IV, checking the chart. When she finished, she paused. "You don't have to answer this," she said carefully. "But do you want us to limit visitors?" "Yes," I said. She smiled gently. "I'll take care of it." After she left, I picked up my phone again. The notifications were already there. Madison had posted another update. This one vague and heavy on implication. Something about boundaries being used as weapons. The comments rolled in fast. I didn't respond. I saved the screenshots instead. The hospital went on around me, steady and functional. Staff rotated. Carts rolled past. The system did what it was built to do. I sat there breathing carefully, the folder no longer on my tray table, and realized that for the first time I hadn't apologized for saying no. The email notification slid across my phone screen just after midnight, bright enough to cut through the dark room. I'd been half awake, listening to the slow rhythm of the monitor and the distant squeak of a cart in the hallway, when the subject line registered. "Unusual transfer attempt detected." I sat up a fraction too fast and paid for it immediately, the sharp reminder in my ribs forcing me to pause and breathe through it. When the pain settled, I opened the email and read it again, slower this time. The bank had flagged an attempted transfer from one of my older accounts. Not my main checking. Not the one everyone knew about. An account I barely used anymore, one I'd opened years ago and forgotten because it never caused problems. The recipient name was familiar, Madison. My stomach tightened. Not with shock, but with something colder. Recognition. I tapped into the app, fingers steady now, and pulled up the alert details. Timestamp, amount, destination. The transfer hadn't gone through. The system had blocked it immediately and locked the account pending verification. I stared at the screen until the letters stopped swimming. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a bill accidentally charged to the wrong card. This wasn't panic dialing because a payment bounced. This was a deliberate attempt to move money that wasn't hers from an account she shouldn't have known how to access. I hit the call button for the bank's fraud department. The rep who answered sounded calm and unhurried, the kind of voice trained to deal with problems without making them worse. She verified my identity, asked a few standard questions, and pulled up the alert. "Do you recognize this transfer?" she asked. "No," I said. "I didn't authorize it." She paused for a beat, then said, "All right. We'll lock the account fully and add monitoring. No funds left the account." I exhaled slowly. How did they access it? "It appears credentials were used that matched previous authorized activity," she said. "We'll document everything." Document. That word mattered. She walked me through the next steps. Password reset. Two-factor authentication. Notes added to the account. She told me I could file a formal report if I wanted to pursue it further. I told her to log everything and leave it at that for now. When the call ended, the room felt too quiet. My phone buzzed again. A text from Madison. "Why is the bank blocking me? I needed that money." I didn't respond. Another text followed. "This is ridiculous. You're destroying everything." I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, the edges of the tiles blurring as I forced myself to stay still. This was the line. The one I hadn't wanted to believe existed until it showed up uninvited. I scrolled back through the messages she'd sent earlier that day. The accusations. The guilt, the demands framed as emergencies. It all looked different now, stripped of any plausible excuse. A nurse came in to check my vitals and found me awake. She asked if I needed anything. I shook my head and watched her note the time on the chart before moving on. When she left, I picked up the phone again and saved the bank alert to a folder. Screenshots, timestamps, the rep's name, the confirmation number. I didn't feel dramatic doing it. I felt methodical. Like this was just another report that needed to be complete. Madison called a few minutes later. I let it ring. She called again, then again. The missed calls stacked up quickly. A voicemail came through. Her voice was sharp, no tears this time. She said I was overreacting. She said families help each other. She said she'd only tried because she didn't know what else to do and I wasn't answering. She said I was forcing her hand. Forcing her hand. My mom texted next. "I don't understand why you're treating us like criminals. Madison is just trying to survive." I stared at that word for a long second. Survive. I pictured the posts, the brunches, the spa days, the folder of bills slid across my hospital tray like a contract. I pictured myself strapped into a helicopter, breathing shallow so my chest wouldn't tear itself apart. I typed once, then erased it. My dad followed with a voicemail. His voice was lower than usual, careful. He said he didn't know about the transfer. He said this had gone too far. He said we needed to talk like adults and sort it out before things got worse. I saved that one too. The rest of the night blurred into small, manageable pieces. A pain check, a cup of water, a reminder to rest. The hospital didn't care about family dynamics. It just kept moving. By morning, the fallout had spread beyond my phone. A message came in from a high school friend asking if everything was okay. She'd seen Madison's latest post. Another from a coworker's spouse who'd heard something vague and wanted to check in. Madison hadn't mentioned the bank. She hadn't mentioned the attempted transfer. She'd posted about betrayal instead. About how money had changed me. About how boundaries could be cruel. I saved those screenshots too. When the doctor stopped by on rounds, he asked how I was feeling. I told him the truth. Sore, tired, clear-headed, in a way I hadn't been before. He nodded and said recovery had a way of clarifying things. Later, Bennett stopped by again, this time just to drop off a charger she'd borrowed from someone else, because she figured my phone battery must be taking a hit. She asked how the family visit went. I said it was handled. She didn't ask for details. I plugged the charger in and watched the battery icon fill slowly, the steady progress oddly comforting. Another text buzzed in from Madison. Last chance. If you don't fix this, don't expect us to be there when you need us. I looked at the message, then at the hospital bracelet still wrapped around my wrist. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the bank app one more time and confirmed the additional security settings. New passwords. Alerts on every transaction. Access locked down to just me. The account status updated. Secured. The room settled back into its familiar rhythm. Monitor, hallway, distant voices. I set the phone down within reach, face up this time, not because I expected anything good to come through, but because I wanted to see it when it did. Nothing about the situation felt dramatic anymore. It felt documented, logged, real. And for the first time since the accident, the question in my head wasn't whether this could be fixed, but whether it ever should have been. The front door of my apartment clicked shut behind me with a softer sound than I expected, like it wasn't sure whether it was allowed to make noise. I stood there for a second, one hand still on the knob, breathing shallow the way the therapist had drilled into me, letting my shoulders settle back into place before I moved again. Green had insisted on driving me home. He didn't ask, just showed up with a borrowed truck, and acted like it was the most normal thing in the world. He carried my bag up the stairs without comment, set it down by the couch, and made a joke about how the place smelled like someone who hadn't cooked a real meal in weeks. He waited until I was seated before leaving, told me to text if I needed anything, and meant it. The apartment looked exactly the way I'd left it. Clean enough, quiet, no signs of emergency. I eased myself down onto the chair at the kitchen table and let the silence settle. Not the kind that presses in on you, but the kind that gives you room to think. I set my phone on the table and opened my laptop. The pain meds blurred the edges of the room just enough to slow me down, which was fine. I wasn't in a hurry. I logged into my bank account first, the main one. I clicked through the settings and pulled up the list of linked users and authorized cards. There were more than I liked seeing all at once. Madison's name. My mom's utility payments. My dad's gas card. Autopays scheduled weeks into the future, all quietly feeding lives that weren't mine. I didn't hesitate. Remove access. Confirm. Remove. Confirm again. Each click felt small. Administrative. Like closing out a file that had been open far too long. When the system asked if I was sure, I didn't pause. I was sure. Next, I opened a new account. Different bank. Different login. New passwords. Two-factor authentication that went only to my phone. I transferred everything over in one clean move and watched the balance update. For the first time in years, my money sat in one place that belonged only to me. My phone buzzed on the table as if it sensed what was happening. Madison first. This isn't funny. My landlord is threatening late fees. I didn't answer. My mom followed. I don't understand why you're doing this to us. We've always been family. I closed the banking app and leaned back carefully, letting the chair support most of my weight. My dad's message came last. Be reasonable. This is getting out of hand. I set the phone face down and focused on breathing through the tightness in my chest. Not pain, just pressure. The messages kept coming while I worked. Accusations shifted to bargaining. Bargaining shifted to anger. Anger slid back into pleading. The cycle was familiar. I'd seen it before, just never from this side of the boundary. When I finished, I closed the laptop and sat there listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden relief. Just a steady sense of something being finished. That night I slept in my own bed for the first time since the accident. It wasn't comfortable. Every movement reminded me I was still healing. But it was mine. No monitors, no hallway noise, just the soft creak of the mattress and my own breathing. The next morning I woke up to sunlight coming through the blinds and a phone that hadn't buzzed once overnight. I made coffee slowly one-handed and drank it standing at the counter because sitting felt like too much effort. When I checked my messages, there were fewer than before. Madison had switched tactics again. This time, she sent a long voicemail voice breaking saying she couldn't do this without me. That she was drowning. That family doesn't abandon each other. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond either. By the end of the week, the consequences reached me secondhand. A mutual acquaintance mentioned Madison had been evicted. Another said my mom had been arguing with a utility company on the phone. Someone else mentioned my dad's truck had been repossessed after missed payments. None of it came with an apology. None of it came with accountability. They tried once more to pull me back in. A letter arrived in my mailbox, my mom's handwriting looping and careful. 3 pages about forgiveness and unity, about how hard things had been for everyone. Tucked neatly inside was a list of bills and a promise to pay me back soon. I recycled it without replying. I changed my number a few days later. Not out of anger, out of practicality. I blocked the old contacts and updated the people who actually needed it. Work, a few friends, Green and Bennett, that was it. On my first day back on light duty, soldiers stopped me in the hallway to say they were glad I was back. Bennett dropped off a casserole she'd made herself and joked that it was edible, which was generous. Green asked if I was ready to be bored again. I told him boredom sounded great. Life settled into something quieter after that. No emergencies. No late-night calls demanding fixes. Just routines. Physical therapy. Work. Evenings that belonged to me. My family kept posting online for a while. Vague quotes. Sad photos. Madison disappeared from social media altogether once people started asking uncomfortable questions. My mom leaned hard into faith and perseverance. My dad stayed silent except for the occasional like. I didn't watch closely. I didn't need to. One evening I opened the folder on my laptop where I'd saved everything. The screenshots, the bank alerts, the messages. I didn't keep them out of spite. I kept them as proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. Proof that walking away wasn't cruelty. It was survival. I closed the folder and looked around my apartment. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't dramatic. But it was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. For a long time I thought loyalty meant sacrificing myself to keep everyone else afloat. I thought being dependable was the same thing as being loved. The accident didn't just break my ribs. It broke that illusion cleanly enough that I couldn't glue it back together even if I wanted to. Family isn't defined by blood or obligation. It's defined by who shows up when there's nothing to gain. My sister never came. My parents never asked. But my military family did without hesitation and without invoices. I didn't get revenge the loud way. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic speeches. I just stopped paying the price for their comfort. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. I used to think family drama had to end with shouting or ultimatums. I was wrong. Sometimes the real ending is quiet. It's choosing boundaries. It's realizing that being useful isn't the same as being loved. Walking away didn't make me heartless. It gave me my life back. And that's the kind of ending most people don't talk about in revenge stories, especially family revenge stories like this one. If this story hit close to home, you're not alone. And if you want more real grounded stories about family drama, military life, and quiet revenge that actually happens in the real world, subscribe to the channel. I'll be here sharing the stories that don't get told enough.